What is up, YouTube? My name's Jason. Welcome back to the channel. Today we are building the root beer. Now, if you don't know what the root beer is, it's an all rose gold watch, GMT, and it looks absolutely stunning. So today we're using a 40mm case. It's got a sapphire crystal, screw down crown, screw down case back, and we're using a dial with my own branding on it. So I cannot wait to see how this one looks. So with that said, let's take a quick look at these parts and get straight into the build. Okay, so first things first for this build, we need to get the dial prepped and ready to fit to this movement. Now, as you can see, our dial has 6 feet on the back of it. Now on the NH34 movement, we only have 2 mounting holes, so this means I need to cut off the excess 4 feet on the back of the dial in order to get this dial fitted to the movement. Now, in case you are wondering, those feet are to fit the dial to movements with different positioned crowns. So the case we're using has a 3 o'clock crown, but the dial gives you the option to use a case with a 3.8 or 4 o'clock crown if you wanted to. So once we've got those feet cut off, we'll just give those little nubs a file down so they're nice and flush with the back of the dial. This way when we fit the dial to the movement, it'll sit nice and flat. Now once we've got these little nubs filed down nice and flat on both sides of the dial, we'll be sure to give the dial a really good clean, because the last thing you want are any metal filings going through your movement. So we'll just get our air blow and give the dial a really good blowdown, and we'll get our Rotoco and just dab it on the back of the dial just to pick up any small metal flakes that we might not see. And we'll just do the same with the top side of the dial as well, just to make sure that it's nice and clean. I find that cleaning as you go is the best way to keep everything nice and clean and avoid any scratches or any marks. So now to prep the movement, there's not much involved. There's a small washer that needs to go over the post on the movement before you fit your dial. Now it's important that you do fit that washer because it's designed to keep tension on the gears and stop them from jumping or slipping. Now it's at about this stage where I realise that this dial isn't for an NH34 movement. Now what's happening is that I can't fit the dial to the movement because the centre hole isn't large enough. It's fouling on the GMT post of the movement. Now on the NH34s, because they have a GMT hand, the centre hole post needs to be slightly larger than what it does on an NH35. So it's quite an easy and common fix. All you need to do is grab a small round file and slowly file the center of the dial out just to increase the size. So that center hole on an NH34 dial needs to be at least 2.88mm, whereas on an NH35 it only needs to be about 2mm. So because I've done a few of these before and my file is slightly tapered, I use the previous witness marks on my file as a guide. so I know where to file down to. And again, just be really thorough when you're cleaning your metal filings from the dial. So now you can see that that dial fits on nice and snugly around the center hole and sits nice and flush on that movement. And that brass color you can see in the center of the dial is just the actual color of the brass dial, which you won't see at all once the hands are fitted. So now that we have our dial fitted and everything is nice and clean, we can get ready to fit our hands to the movement. So in order to do this, we need to get our movement to 12 AM. Now the way we know we're at 12 AM is when that date wheel flicks over. So what we'll do is we'll pull the crown out and wind the movement over until that date wheel flicks over. Then we know we're at 12 AM and we can go ahead and fit our handset. And once we start to see that date wheel turning over like that, we'll just go nice and slowly, and then that date wheel will click over so we can get it nice and accurate. So first hand to fit is our GMT hand. Now obviously because we're at 12 AM on the movement, we're going to line up our GMT hand, our hour hand and our minute hand to the 12 o'clock hour marker. And just for those who are unaware of what a GMT hand is, basically your GMT hand is a 24-hour hand. So for every 24 hours that pass, the GMT hand will do one full rotation of the dial. Unlike your hour hand, which will do 2 full rotations in a 24-hour period. Once it's pressed on, I'll then rotate the movement over all the way back to 12 o'clock just to make sure that that hand is going to clear all the indices and that there's no issues anywhere. So next up is our hour hand, and obviously exact same process for fitting the hand as the GMT hand. Just lining it up at 12 o'clock and using that Rodeco just to fine tune the placement. And those clear tips on the hand press can also be really helpful for making sure that the hand is centered on the post before you press it down. And this hand is taking a little bit of fiddling around to get it lined up. As you can see, once it's lined up, it presses down nice and smoothly and sits flush on the top of the hour post. And just quickly going back to how that GMT hand works, here you can see when I rotate the movement over, the hour hand does one full rotation and that GMT hand does half a rotation. So again, once we get that hour hand pressed on, we just rotate the movement over twice just to make sure everything lines back up at 12 o'clock and that our hands have the appropriate clearances and aren't going to foul on each other. So next up is our minute hand. So same deal here, just using that Rodeco and lining it up at 12 o'clock. And you can see how I'm using that Rodeco just to fine tune the placement of that hour hand, just to get it lined up perfectly at 12 o'clock. And you can see there it sits nice and flush with the top of that post. And just rotating the movement just to make sure that everything clears and we line up back at 12 o'clock and the date wheel flicks over right where it should. Now on these NH movements, generally anywhere 15 minutes either side of 12 o'clock is considered normal for the date to change. So don't be too stressed if your date changes 10 or 15 minutes before or after 12 o'clock. And last but not least is our second hand. Now a lot of people consider this the hardest hand to place, but with a bit of practice, good lighting and a good hand press, it does get easier and easier every time you do it. So don't get disheartened if you can't get it on the first shot. Just remember that I've been doing this for about 4 years, so I've had a lot of practice now. So once I get that hand pressed on, I push the crown in and wind the movement up just to get that second hand ticking and make sure that everything is working as it should. You also want to check the clearances and just make sure that second hand is not going to foul on your minute hand. So as we can see there, it passes over the minute hand beautifully with no issues at all. A lot of people also ask if these are true GMT watches. So as you can see there, you can set the GMT hand individually from the hour hand, the minute hand and the date, making it a true GMT movement. So now that the dial, movement and the hands are all fitted and ready to go, we can start to prep the case to pair the two together. So we'll take off the case back, remove the gasket, and our first step is cleaning that crystal to make sure it is crystal clean. Now I've already cleaned this crystal when I was shooting the parts list for this build, so luckily for me it's just a quick once over just to double check that there's nothing on the crystal that needs to be removed. But like I said before, get that lens pen and your air blower, they're your two best friends for cleaning the crystal. So once we're happy that that crystal is nice and clean, we can remove the dummy crown from our movement and get ready to fit it to the case. So to remove that dummy crown, make sure the crown is pushed all the way in and it'll expose a small tab on the back of the movement. Then all you need to do is depress that tab and the crown will pop straight out. Then I'll give my movement and dial one final clean just to make sure there's no debris left on the movement. If you do find any debris in the movement, you can use your air blower to blow it off or get your Rotocare and just dab it on there just to lift up any dust or any hair. But you really want to make sure that everything is super clean before you pair the two together so you don't have to take them back apart. So once we pop the case over the movement, we'll flip it over and just make sure that the movement is sitting nice and flush in that case. I also at this stage like to make sure that the movement is in line with the crown tube on the case. So if it is a little bit off like mine is here, you can use a screwdriver to gently push the movement into line with the case. So now that everything is lined up and sitting properly in the case, we can start to get a real feel for how this watch is going to look. And it's looking awesome. I'm so happy with it so far. And I'm absolutely stoked with my dial design and how it's looking with the hands in the case. So now that we're on the final stretch, let's pull this crown out and get the crown stem cut to length. So to do this, I've got a crown stem template that I use, which is about 15mm long. So what I do is get my new crown stem, which comes with your movement, line it up with my template and cut it slightly longer than my template. This way it gives me a little bit of room to play with and I can fine tune the length after I test fit it and see where we're at. So once I cut that crown stem, I'll just give it a quick file on the end just to knock off any sharp burrs that may damage the thread inside the crown. So now we'll screw our crown onto the stem and give this a test fit inside the case. Now when we test fit this crown, we want to make sure that it screws all the way down into the case. We want to make sure that we can pull the crown out to both positions so that we can change the time and the date. And we want to make sure that we can wind the movement without it catching on the threads. Now this stem is still a little too long. As you can see, there's about a 2mm gap between the crown and the case. Now we need that gap to be non-existent. So what we'll do is pull the crown back out, chop about 2mm off the stem, refile the threads, and then do another test fit to see how it looks. So the crown clicks all the way in, we've got a little bit of free play and we can pull the crown out to both positions. So this time it looks like we've nailed the length of that stem. As you can see, that crown screws in flush to the case and there's no gap there. So now we can pull this crown out for the last time, unscrew it from the stem, and apply some Loctite so this crown doesn't come loose unintentionally. If your crown does come loose unintentionally, you may notice this because you won't be able to adjust the time correctly or wind the movement. So you just need a small dab of medium strength Loctite, and this will make sure that that crown doesn't come loose. I use the medium strength because if I ever do need to remove the crown for servicing purposes, it's nice and easy to undo. And before you pop that crown back into the movement, just make sure that you clean up any excess Loctite. So once we fit our stem for the last time, we can go ahead and get ready to lock this case up. So we'll get our case back gasket and lubricate it in silicone grease. This will help the case back go nice and smoothly and keep the water resistance rating of the watch. That silicone grease just gives an extra water resistance barrier. We'll pop that gasket into the groove on the case, then we can get our case back and start to run it in by hand before finally locking it down with our case back tool. Now our last step in completing this watch is fitting the bracelet. So to do this, I pop the spring bar into the bracelet and sit the bracelet over the case. I'll then get my screwdriver and just gently pop one side of the spring bar in at a time while applying pressure to the bracelet with my thumb. Once both sides of the spring bar have been located into the case, I then use my small screwdriver just to wiggle that spring bar around to make sure that the spring bars lock into the holes that are in the case. Then it's as simple as repeating that process on the other side and this watch is finally done. Now if you do want to pick up a watch like this for yourself, I do have them available to order on my website, which is jbwatchmods.com.au. And I cannot wait to see how this thing looks with my own branding on the dial, as I plan to use this design over a whole range of different GMT styled watches. Let's take a look and let me know what you guys think in the comments below. that is going to do it for today's video. Let me know in the comments below what you thought of today's build. Do you have a rose gold watch in the collection? If not, I think it is a must-have. They look absolutely awesome. Also, I would love to hear your thoughts on my branding on the dial. Would you rock it? Keen to hear your thoughts below. Until next time, see you later.